Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer in that order. Welcome everyone, Happy New Year, and question and answer time. Thank you everyone for submitting all the questions. Got a lot of good ones, so we're going to split it up into two videos. First video here, and the second video will be posted a week from today. First question of the year comes from Razzle You Heard, and they ask, is there money to be made buying cards off eBay and grading them with PSA? So I'm sure you could sort of be profitable doing that, but I think that's just a really, really tough way to make money in sports cards, buying cards off eBay with the intent to get them graded. I mean, on eBay, you're only getting a picture. Often it's not a very high quality picture, and the value in grading is often the difference between like a 9 and a 10, and you're just not going to be able to differentiate that in an eBay picture most of the time, or even between an 8, 9, or 10. That's something you really would do better in person at a card show or something where you can actually look at the card in hand. On eBay, I think it's going to be tough to do that consistently. I buy a good bit off of eBay, a lot of raw stuff, cards that I think are undervalued or just a good price for whatever reason. And, if some of them come in and they end up being worth grading, I don't buy them with the intent to grade them, but if some come in and they are worth grading, I consider that, more of a bonus than than like a strategy. Coulter asks, it seems like most people refer to population reports to determine scarcity of a non-numbered card. It's not hard, though, to find videos and posts about how to crack slabs and the successes, failures of getting cards regraded. Do you think there will ever be a time when pop reports have lost their credibility? Do you think there will ever be a better way to determine card scarcity? So I wouldn't really predict that cracking is going to sort of render the pop reports, to be not credible in the big picture or the long run. Just in the big picture, just such a small percentage of cards actually get cracked out of their holders. I mean, I crack a card every once in a while that I think is a really low grade, but the number of cards I crack is way less than 1% of graded cards I receive. So I just don't think the numbers will be skewed in any sort of meaningful way in that sense. Now it will happen, and it already has happened, and I'm sure will continue to happen, where you have like a really, really rare card that's like super low pop, and maybe it got graded and then cracked and then resubmitted and cracked and then resubmitted again, and it shows on the pop report a pop 3, but it's really a pop 1. That I'm sure happens all the time, and I don't really know how you would avoid that. I mean, SGC does keep track of the serial number. I think that's a good start for sure. Beyond that, I don't images of course would help, but I don't know how you can really track that. I'm sure somebody will come up with something, or at least I hope they do. But beyond that, if a card has like a pop count of, let's say, 50 or more, I don't think the cracking is really going to impact it in any sort of meaningful way for the most part. Maxweller wrote, intelligent sport card investing or S&P 500, your pick. So I do a little bit of both. I mean, at S&P 500, that's been a pretty safe bet for 80 years now, or whatever it is. But people say invest in what you know and understand. Don't invest in things you don't understand. And, I understand sports cards, so I have most of my investments there. Chris Oliva wrote, hobby prices, especially ultra-modern, seem to still be correcting since the high point in March of 2021. Do you think it continues in 2023, or prices overall finally stabilize? And Neil Arnett asked a very similar question. When the hobby went crazy during the pandemic and opened doors to multiple breakers and skyrocketing card prices, how do you see the next few years in card values and pricing since it's cooled off somewhat with singles, although not as much as with box prices? So I really don't know. Predicting what's going to happen with the market in the short term is not something I'm any good at, and not something I really even try. I would guess that at some point the market will sort of flatten out. For 20 years before the 2020 price boom, the card market was pretty flat year to year. I mean, modern stuff would go up and down based on player performance, but for the most part, if you looked at the values of cards, at a moment in time and then did the same thing a year later, it was basically no change. And that was basically the norm. So I would imagine we'll get back to that at some point fairly soon, where that's the norm. That would be my guess, but beyond that, I really don't know. Ned Braden 30 asked, who are the athletes from the 1970s that a non-historian-oriented sports consumer in 2022-23 is likely to know and have an image of in their 2023 mind? Along these lines, who are the sports persons currently active and perhaps elite in 2022-23 who just might still be recognizable and fascinating to a sports hobby consumer in, say, the year 2050? Whose moments and careers will be still be talked about then? So if you're talking like worldwide, who's the number one household name of an athlete from the 70s, I would think Pele is number one by a decent margin. If you're talking about within the U.S., I would think Muhammad Ali is probably the number one name. Hank Aaron's definitely really high up there. His moment, breaking the home run record in the 70s was a big one. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is probably the most dominant athlete in an American sport in the 70s. So those would be some of the names that would sort of jump out. If you're talking about in 2050, what players today will still be talked about? Certainly Tom Brady, certainly LeBron James, GOATs in the sport. And worldwide, I would certainly guess it's going to be Lionel Messi. Contender Sports Cards on Instagram asked if an SGC 9 slab doesn't have any online comparable sales, is it fair to just price the card based on a PSA 8 price, like one grade lower? So I wouldn't make like a blanket rule like that. There's just going to be way too many exceptions. It depends on so many factors about the card. Is it a modern card, vintage card? Is it how rare is it? How desired is it in a PSA holder versus SGC pop counts? All this stuff. There's going to be way too many exceptions for like a blanket rule like that. But yeah, if you really have no comps to go off of other than that, no sales at all to look at, and you're talking about a modern card, yeah, that's probably a decent guess. Price it like it's in a PSA holder but one grade lower. Francisco Montano wrote, we all know you're a big World Cup fan, but do you watch any World Baseball Classic? I actually don't. I'm not even really sure why. That's totally the kind of event I would really get into, but for whatever reason it's just always sort of dodged my radar. But yeah, I never really watch it. Charlie asked, you often will show 80s sports cards and then say, let's get wild. Is there some kind of hidden meaning to that, or is it just because the 80s were considered a wild era? I was born in the 80s, but I was too young to remember it. You show an intro photo of a kid having a card table set up by the road instead of a traditional lemonade stand. Was that really you? And what are your thoughts on choosing between early year high-end cards like refractors versus base rookie cards? For instance, Tom Brady has 40 different rookie cards. Even his iconic Bowman Chrome card has over an 8,000 pop count. PSA and Beckett, a PSA 9 will cost around $3K. For the same amount of money, you could buy a PSA 9 of both his 2002 Bowman Chrome refractor, numbered to $599, and his 2002 Topps Finest refractor, numbered to $250, both with obviously much less pop counts. So the 1980s thing, I started collecting cards in 1988. 1980s baseball is my first memories of sports cards. It's my personal favorite decade. Just because I have so many fond memories of it. You don't see a lot of 80s cards on like the high rollers and stuff. So just whenever it pops up, I say let's get wild just for fun. It's actually a line from a Parks and Rec episode. The Aziz Ansari character, he's like hosting a party and he just says like, Leslie Knope is in the building, let's get wild, and the whole place goes crazy. I thought it was hilarious, so I just used the line for the channel here. The photo of the card sale set up at the side of the road, yeah, that's me. I was there with my buddy Jacques, and that's probably like 1992, somewhere in there. I'm about 12 or 13, and yeah, we used to do that. And that was the boom of the hobby is, early 90s, the junk wax era, as they call it. And yeah, you could do that. You could set up cards on the side of the road, and there were enough people into cards who would stop by and buy a few cards from you. And then your last question is a complicated one that would really take, it really depends on sort of the circumstance. I generally say, I assume you're talking about investing. Obviously, if you're collecting, you should collect whichever those cards you would rather have for your collection. If you're talking about sort of like investing, I generally say go with rookie cards, but in your specific example, that might be an exception as both his second year refractors in PSA 9s, those are going to be tough. We're talking about Tom Brady, so his legacy isn't going anywhere. It's sort of a toss up. If you were asking me which I would take to invest, I'd probably take the refractors, but it's close. Mark Brady asked, hey Chris, given you are an American living abroad, I would love to hear your experience watching the World Cup and especially the match that USA got eliminated in. Were you the only one there rooting for the good old USA? Yeah, so I actually watched the first two USA games in a bar here, and the first one was against Wales, and it was in an Irish pub, so basically everyone was rooting for Wales. The second one was like with a bunch of Dutch friends, and they were all rooting with me, along with me, for the US. I always rooted for the Dutch whenever they were playing as well, except obviously when they faced the US. They were my number 2 team, and Argentina was my number 3 team, as my wife's from Argentina. But yeah, very, very fun. It's a super, super, super friendly culture here. You could be in a bar where everyone's rooting for the other team, and you've got all your USA gear on, and everyone's going to be super cool about it. And, I play on a men's soccer team here, like in a men's league, and so I kind of get some street cred. Most Europeans assume Americans don't know anything about soccer. I can sort of hold my own in a game, and, I know enough about the history of the game, so like I said, I kind of get some street cred here. But I actually watched the USA-Netherlands game in the U.S. I'd flown into the States for the Philadelphia Card Show, watched it in a bar in Philadelphia, and with a bunch of other Americans. Obviously they lost. I was texting with my Dutch friends the whole time. We were sort of talking trash back and forth a little bit in a very, very friendly way, but obviously I lost out on that one. But here was my favorite thing that I sent them in sort of the trash talking, vein.
There are only 2 things I can't stand in this world. People who are intolerant of other people's cultures, and the Dutch.
Hall of Fame card collector asked, are PSA or SGC 1 or 2 grades good investment for the long term of key Hall of Fame baseball and basketball vintage cards like a 56 Mantle and Jackie Robinson, a 54 Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks rookies, 59 Bob Gibson, 61 Fleer Wilt Chamberlain or Jerry West, and Oscar 39 Playball Joe DiMaggio, 49 Bowman Jackie Robinson, etc. So whenever somebody asks me, is this a good, is this card a good long-term investment? I always want to look at the chart of the sales data of the card over time, and not just like the last year or two, but over an extended period of many, many years, and see if there's like a slow, steady upwards trend that just continues over time. And if there is, then I would say, well, it's more likely to continue that trend than to just sort of switch randomly. And if you look at the cards you're talking about, the key cards of key, major all-time greats from the vintage eras, Hank Aaron rookie, Willie Mays rookie, Mickey Mantle rookie, Jackie Robinson rookie, Joe Namath, all these have just shown very, very, very good long-term steady growth over the course of many, many years, decades even in the lowest of grades, PSA 1s, for example. Here's a chart of the Hank Aaron rookie. This is a 1954 Topps Hank Aaron rookie PSA 1. And these are all the sales from starting from 2008 to present. So we're looking at 14 years of data here. You can see in 2009 it was about a $200 card. In 2015 it was about a $400 card. 2018 it was about a $600 card. 2019 it was about a $1,000 card. 2020 it's about a $1,200 card. Then there's all this craziness around 2021. But today it's about an $1,800 card. So you can see that's a very, very, very long-term steady upwards growth. And again, I don't know for sure that that's going to continue, but my guess would be that it's more likely to continue that trend than not. So I would say that this particular card, Hank Aaron PSA 1, 1954 Topps rookie, is a good long-term investment in my best guess. Meme Maker asked, if boomers croak, will there be a flood of vintage card estate sales lowering prices? I mean, I guess that could happen, but I wouldn't really expect that. I mean, as people leave the hobby for whatever reason, there's always new people who to come into the hobby to replace them, and people sort of gravitate towards vintage over time. So I think that sort of all balances itself out in the long run. Eric asked, what is your fondest memory of growing up in the hobby? There's no way I could pick a favorite, but I'll just name one that just came to me here. I have three cousins. Well, I have a bunch of cousins, but I have three cousins who are brothers, Alex, Eric, and Kirk, and I grew up living near them, and my parents and their parents would get together every couple of weeks, and whenever we did, we always traded cards. And they would wait to trade with each other until I was around. So it was like this big event where all four of us were trading with all four of the others. And I would go through each of their collections, pull out cards I wanted, and put them into piles. And we had like a 4x4 grid of piles of cards. Like, this is the pile of cards Chris wants from Alex, Chris wants from Eric, Chris wants from Kirk. Alex wants from Chris, Alex wants from, it was like that. And then we would make a whole bunch of trades, taking turns, and go through it that way. And it was like a big event. I mean, it took hours. And we used Beckett magazine to make sure everything added up correctly. Your stack's $4.25 worth of cards. Mine's $4.75. You need to add 50 more cents to make the trades fair. And this was just a really, really fun thing we did every time we got together. So, yeah, that's a memory that just came to me here. Obsessed Collector asked, do you feel the market and hobby has been ruined by modern collector investors, those young guns around 16 to 30s that carry around Pelican boxes and only care about the value of modern graded cards? These are the same guys that look at you funny if you mention 1950s and 1960s Hall of Famers. And do you believe most 2018 to 2022 graded cards are junk slabs? So I definitely wouldn't say it's like ruined anything. I might even kind of go the other way and say, the more ways there are to enjoy the hobby, the more variety of people can enter, and that's good. The more the better. You can be a collector. You can just collect your favorite player, or you put sets together, or modern, vintage, whatever. You can just be a flipper looking to make a quick buck here and there. You can be an investor looking to hold cards long term. You can be a dealer, part-time, full-time. You can be a breaker, whatever. Maybe you like cards because of nostalgia. Maybe you like cards because you just like to show off to your friends. Maybe you like cards because you like to post it on Instagram and get a whole bunch of thumbs ups and likes that way. And, to me, that's all fine. Open pack, whatever it is, I think that's all fine. The type of person you're talking about, like, young 20s who has just a ton of money and walking around with big money, modern cards and has no idea about the history of sports cards. I mean, that's not the way I enjoy the hobby or the way I connect with the hobby at all. But I wouldn't, I don't have any issue with other people connecting that way. And I would sort of say, everyone, bring everyone in. The more the better. Do you believe most 2018 to 2022 graded cards are junk slabs? Yeah, I think you're kind of spot on there. I've made a couple of videos about this. There's just way too much of that stuff out there, particularly base cards. I mean, some of the rarer stuff, no, but Yeah, especially base cards from the ultra modern era. There's just way too much supply. I just don't see how that stuff can sort of do well long term. Hold its value if it hasn't sort of collapsed already with a lot of the base stuff. Nate the Great asked, I purchased this Hostess panel and I cut the cards out. Pause for the possible gasp. My question is, should I have? I'll explain my reasoning. If it wasn't mint and it was equal to $2 a card for the 77 Rose, Carew, and Seaver. I'm collecting every possible Hall of Fame 70s card in parallel so they fit right into the PC. Still, it felt kind of wrong cutting them out. No problem here. I mean, these are your cards. You paid for them. They're cards for your PC. You should, collect cards however you want. You should put cards into your personal collection however you want. Shouldn't feel bad about that. If that's the way you like to collect by separating these, that's perfectly reasonable. If you're talking about purely from like a financial standpoint, I don't really think it's going to make much of a difference here. The panel clearly wasn't in tip-top shape. It's got some creases and stuff, so I don't think you did any financial damage really here either. Jeff asked, I have a question about early 80s baseball factory sets. On the sets that are close to pristine and look like they have cards that were never or rarely been touched, would you pull out the good cards and either protect them or see if they are gradable? Some of these sets, the cards are bricked and shrink wrapped, but on those I figure the best idea is to save them. Just wanted to get your opinion. So it very much depends on which sets you're talking about specifically. I don't know which ones you're referring to, early 80s. Generally cards from the 80s, you really got to get really, really high grades to make financial sense to get stuff graded. So again, it depends on which set you're talking about. Like if you're talking about, let's say, 82 and 83 sets, I mean, yeah, I'd take a look at the Ripken rookies, the Gwen rookies, the Sandberg rookies, the Boggs rookies, see if any of them look ultra high grade and maybe consider grading them there. But again, you're going to really need like centered, pack fresh type cards in order for it to make sense to grade them. But yeah, probably worth a look. David Thompson asked, even though you seldomly open new product, what is your take on the Pacific Crown incident where if you know the first 3 digits on the hologram sticker, you'll pull a Kaboom card? There are 6 videos on YouTube that prove this, and do you think it's something fishy going on over at Panini? So I'm really not up to date on this story. I don't follow new product at all. I haven't opened a Panini product in 10 years at least. I don't know anybody who works at Panini. Basically all I know is what you asked in your question. It appears that based on some of the serial numbers of certain Panini products, you can identify which boxes will contain the Kaboom hits, and a lot of people have been taking advantage of this. And I mean, obviously, this is a big problem, big mistake by Panini, and they need to fix it right away. And I don't know if they've answered, put out a statement as to why that happened or not. I would assume they should, but that's really all I know about it. And Richard Price asked, is there an efficient and reliable way to find out if a raw card is trimmed before buying it online? Same question, but buying it in person. So with online, it's really tough just because you're only going to be getting a picture, and you're just not going to be able to tell from a picture if cards are trimmed. The best thing I would say about if you're buying vintage cards online that you think might be trimmed, just make sure you're buying it from a reputable seller with very good feedback. That's sort of the best way to protect yourself. If you're online, if you're buying it in person, yeah, you can take the card and line it up with another card and measure it. And the other card should be a card that's just not going to be trimmed like a common or something. And just line it up, and you'll be able to see often that it's a little short in one direction. It's not perfect. You might still miss like a really, really, really light trimming, but you'll probably be able to weed out like 90% of cards that are trimmed doing that. But that's it for round 1 of question and answers. Thank you everyone for submitting the questions. And if anyone feels I didn't answer your question in full, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll do my best to sort of follow up. But like I said, round 2 will be posted a week from today. Thanks everyone.